There were supposed to be 7 people on the panel. Unfortunately, one of them is not able to attend. Leyla, Keser, will be missing today. But we also have Ruslan, Nurullaev. It's me. I'm a junior research fellow at the International Laboratory for Information Technology and Intellectual Property Law at the High School of Economics. Then we have Balazs, Bodo, economist and piracy researcher at the Institute for Information Law. We have Primavera de Filippi, permanent researcher at the National Center of Scientific Research. We also have Susana Nascimento, policy analyst and researcher at the Joint Research Center, European Commission. We have Guido Diega, lecturer in law at the Northumbria University and director of IOT Center of Multidisciplinary Research on the Internet of Things. And finally, we have Savelyev, senior research fellow at the International Laboratory for Information Technology and Intellectual Property Law at the High School of Economics, and also senior attorney of IBM Russia. If you have a look at the program, we are supposed to have 3 topics today. One of them was supposed to be devoted to data protection, but considering that another panel on blockchain and data protection just took place, we thought that it may be more convenient if we focus our panel more on intellectual property. And today we would like to discuss 2 topics. The first topic is how to preserve trust in smart contracts as a new way of commercialization of intellectual property. And the second topic is, are blockchain-based copyright ownership databases an opportunity or a problem for intellectual property law? We are going to spend 30 minutes on each topic. 20 minutes will be reserved for discussion between the speakers, and 10 minutes for questions from the audience. With this, I would like to move to the first topic, and I would like to start with a couple of very brief questions. First of all, who in the audience knows what blockchain and smart contracts are? Could you please raise your hand? Oh, that's very nice. You're better prepared than I am. And who has any personal experience with blockchain and smart contracts? Quite a lot of people. That's very nice. Okay, then let's start with the first topic. How to preserve trust in smart contracts as a new way of commercialization of intellectual property. Primavera, would you like to start?
Just for the sake of introduction, I'm going to make a very short overview of what is the blockchain. So I guess everybody is quite acquainted with Bitcoin, which is the first application that actually introduced the blockchain technologies. And the idea with the blockchain is essentially just that it is a decentralized, tamper-resistant, and append-only database. So data gets recorded on the blockchain according to a particular protocol. Every single node that participates to maintaining the network needs to validate those transactions before accepting them. And then every transaction is referencing the former transaction so that it becomes, you create these chains of blocks which contain specific transactions. And then you basically get a way to certify when a particular actor has done a particular transaction by looking at the blockchain. So in the case of Bitcoin, this is essentially in the context of financial transactions. And the idea is simply, if we do eliminate the centralized intermediaries, which is usually the financial institutions, how can we actually make sure that people are not gonna spend twice the same transaction? So how do we actually verify that every transaction is valid according to the protocol? And so by relying on a particular consensus algorithm, then Bitcoin has created a mechanism by which you can actually transact value in a secure and decentralized manner without the need for a centralized trusted authority. And then the the use of blockchain technologies, and so Bitcoin and other technology that have been inspired from it, can also, beyond the financial transaction, can be used in order to actually record information. So by embedding a particular data within an actual transaction, then you can record specific facts. So either you can record data directly into the blockchain, or you can record a particular digest of a file, so that no one looking at the blockchain really knows what has been recorded, but anyone which has a copy of the digital file can compare the digest of this file with whatever information has been recorded on the blockchain, and this constitutes a proof that at that particular point in time, this person which recorded this transaction had access to the original file. And so there are a variety of applications which have been experimenting with those functionalities, most notably with in order to record intellectual property, either as a way of creating some kind of prior art, like proof of existence of a particular file, as well as potentially to complement this information with specific metadata as to what are the licensing information that are associated with this work, and then potentially licensing by creating transactions which are actually representing the licensing of specific rights to those work, then the possibility of using the blockchain as a proof that a particular work has been licensed under specific conditions. And then there are alternative, more modern blockchain which have been developed, which introduce the ability not just to execute a financial transaction and not just to record data on the blockchain in a certified manner, but also to enable the deployment of software directly on the blockchain in a way that we do no longer need to rely on a centralized operators that will maintain a server in order to execute a software, but the software is executed in a decentralized manner by all the nodes in the network, and this means that there is a guarantee of execution because no single party can actually intervene and manipulate or influence or stop the execution of this software. And so, and again, this has been explored to some extent as to can we therefore automate specific transactions, and most importantly, in the case of intellectual property, can we actually rely on the software in order to enable people to record specific content and to record the rights associated with those content, creating licensing system, and then automate the payment of those whenever someone wants to use a software, needs to pay for that and obtain the specific licensing right, and therefore is able to use this work, and then potentially to automatically dispatch the redistribution of the royalties directly by simply inscribing on the blockchain the genealogy of the works and who has contributed to what and what are the derivative works that have been created from there, so that when there is funds coming to one specific artwork, then automatically it's the funds are redistributed in proportion to the contribution of all the people that have been participating. So there is a variety of applications that have emerged, basically relying on this technology and trying to see whether these actually make technical and economic sense to rely on blockchain technology in order to some extent disintermediate the commercialization of artistic work. And then, so basically, just as a summary, so the question is, one, blockchain technology can be used just for the purpose of recordation, so to register information about intellectual property. Secondly, it's the possibility to actually automate specific transactions about intellectual property. And thirdly, there is this is my own project, sorry about that, but this is the idea of actually how can we use smart contract to innovate beyond the traditional models of commercialization and actually create specific systems which are actually focusing no longer on the artist, but actually focusing on the art piece. And the idea with the blockchain is that it becomes possible to, because we can create those software that are executed directly on the blockchain, it becomes possible to assign funds to the software, and this software is actually representing a particular art piece. and then using the code within that software to enable a specific governance system that will facilitate the possibility for this particular software that represents the art piece to actually develop itself by using those funds in order to hire people that will then create copies of itself. So this is the most modern version of using blockchain. To some extent, the idea here is that instead of looking at copyright as the author, as the genius, and as the person that actually should be rewarded for the artistic work, is going more towards the open source model in which you have the artwork that can evolve on its own, and the artist actually no longer has the ability to prevent the evolution of this art because of the copyleft license. And here it's actually going one step further, in which the artist becomes a servant, if you like, or the artwork is the main focus of the rights, and then is actually employing the artist in order to help in the reproduction. I'm not sure if I explained very well, but the idea here then is to discuss in this panel, so between those three different uses of blockchain technologies for intellectual property, which one actually makes sense, what are the opportunities that are provided, which are the challenges with regard to those models, and where can we actually go? Like what should we actually focus on by looking at the new opportunities of this technology in order to facilitate the sharing of information in a certified manner, in order to facilitate the commercialization, and so forth. So, is that okay of an introduction?
I think
Okay.
it's very nice. Thank you very much.
So,
Will any other speaker would like to comment on this? Do you think that the projects which commercialize IP, which Primavera just brought as an example, are viable alternative to traditional licensing?
Are we commenting on the...
Yeah.
Does it work? Yeah, okay, great. So thank you, that was very interesting. Just some points. So are you familiar with the concept of DRM, Digital Rights Management? Raise your hand. Okay, great. So I don't need to explain that. So you know that that kind of technology didn't really work in the sense that wasn't very good for, let's say, copyright exceptions, because you as a copyright owner could prevent any kind of use, even though that use was falling under a copyright exception. But at the same time, those technologies are breakable. So people were finding and are finding ways to sidestep those technologies. There is a problem with blockchain that in theory it's unbreakable, and therefore as a copyright owner you could use it to track every kind of use of your work forever, everywhere in the world, and prevent any use, even if that use falls under a copyright exception. And I think that's kind of scary. Another concept that you mentioned was digital scarcity and tokenization. So scarcity, digital scarcity, really copyright itself, even before blockchain, is a tool to introduce digital scarcity, because ideas are not scarce. If I share my idea with you, we both have the idea, right? So ideas are not scarce. Copyright is a way to make ideas scarce, but at the same time, it has some safeguards built in. Therefore, I cannot, in theory, abuse of my copyrights. There is a problem with this new way of introducing digital scarcity. And for some of us, it might be really, really curious to know that there are people willing to pay more than $100,000 for a picture of a cat, which is the crypto kitty, right? And why is that? It's because it's a new digital scarcity. People know that these resources are verifiably scarce. That's the point, and that's kind of scary. And that really made me think of something I was reading recently by Rousseau on the origins of inequality. Even before the social contract, what Rousseau said was that the origin of the inequalities in our society is private property. Why is that? Was it like a Marxist? Well, not really, right? The point was that he said inequality was born when a man, possibly a man and not a woman, at some point stood up and said, this land is mine, and all the rest of the people were stupid enough not to say you're crazy. That was the point in other terms. He was way more elegant than I am. So I think that we should sort of be aware and alert that what's going on is kind of scary, and it could be another wave of propertization. Then talking about UJO and these applications of blockchain to manage music, to pay royalties to the musicians. So it's true probably that the biggest asset in the music industry is the musician itself, and they are not really rewarded. So if you think of a royalties in terms of a cake, the artist will get a little slice at the end of a distribution that lasts approximately 18 months. And I think this is not really fair, and these solutions like UJO could help in this direction. But we shouldn't be like too enthusiastic about it, because we must not think that we are cutting out the middleman. The intermediaries will always play a role, a different role, but will always be there. And to conclude, because we were talking about smart contracts and trust, I think it's a very funny concept, trust, in the context of blockchain. What is trust? So we trust the blockchain because it cannot be broken, cannot be changed, right, in theory. But then, of course, most of us know what happened with the DAO that was, with the hard fork, was modified ex post. So the smart contract in theory was there, but they found a way to actually breach it. So even the main selling point of a smart contract doesn't really work for me. And so I started thinking, what is trust? So why do we trust each other? Do we trust each other because we know that we're never gonna make mistakes? Or we trust each other because we recognize that we are all humans, and that at some point we might change our mind? Most legal systems really are designed to allow people to change their mind. So if I sign a contract, I change my mind, the legal system will allow me. I will have just to compensate the first party with which I signed a contract, and I will move my resources elsewhere. That's the doctrine of the efficient breach. And so I think we should recognize that the world changes constantly, and human beings change constantly. And the blockchain is not flexible enough to accommodate us as humans. That's my point.
Maybe I can go next. So my thoughts on blockchain and intellectual property come more from the possibilities of this technology for managing digital content from now into the future. When you're talking about the possibilities, as Primavera and Guido explained some of the characteristics of them, the blockchain has some promises of enabling, for example, if you take the music industry as probably one of the most, so far, most experimental fields when it comes to blockchain and management of IP rights, there is some possibilities of trying to get a fairer distribution of profits across. So, and also, not only that you could, the creators and the artists can also get much more access to data that they have right now. It's not just a matter of course, you can try out, and I think that's where our research is going to. We are looking into blockchain for industrial applications, and one of them is in intellectual property. It's exactly, of course, it can be new models for business, for commercialization of digital content. This can come, of course, from paper use, automatic payments, and a more direct link between creators and consumers or users or listeners of music. and where you have interesting, you still have, there's not, there are some examples of, a scribe has been one of the attempts to do another type of licensing using a blockchain, Mycelia, which is also a music, what you could call a music ecosystem that is recently released a song and then received payments for the royalties of that song, again, using Ethereum. And then you can start thinking about other models, and that's, I think, also the purpose, at least of our research, is looking into the future. And one of our experiments, one of our prototypes, in fact, goes into how you could transform or even grant the status of intellectual property to any type of artifact, in fact. So we're looking into, for example, on a cultural artifact in a local community, a song, a fairy tale, gossip, and you can transform it, and that's where the notion of tokens, of tokenization, you can basically tokenize pretty much anything, and you can and you curate that scarcity based on how valuable it is to the community. How do you even access it? You can have different levels of access depending on if you're locally based, what is your interest in the region, why you're doing it. So we're trying to figure out also some new models there. Or you can, another example that we're working on is even a blockchain music player where the metadata, the emotional response to listening to a tune, how that information can go back. So the blockchain could actually allow this type of recording to be very easily available to all the actors in the same system. Of course, these are a bit. Everybody's experimenting and speculating around what could be done. One of our concerns also is, of course, that we move towards an excessive commoditization of any type of content that is cataloged, because the blockchain is good for that, for recording, for keeping track of it. So if you catalog and you track and you monitor every single use of digital content, well, you can pretty much see where that leads us. And maybe in our actual system of copyright and patents, and it can get to a point of even furthering the problems that we have in the existing system. Of course, there is encouraging signs. There are encouraging signs of how you can do it, and there's other models that could be explored through blockchain technology, looking more into the individuals or peer-to-peer, and you could really imagine other models. And we're not looking into very specifically on that, but you can already imagine, any type of digital content or digital good that you have, and you can easily exchange it, sell it, lend it to someone, not in a commercial type of profit-oriented way, but you can probably do it at a much lower cost in the future, not now, and with a fairer and more transparent way of doing that.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more speaker on this point, and then we should go to questions. So, Alexander, Balazs.
Okay, thank you. Could you please pass me this speaker? Thank you. So, I think that it would make sense to say a few words about the notion of smart contract in order to bring some additional clarity here, because I saw that not everyone raised hands about the understanding of this concept, and it is very crucial for further understanding of how it may be implemented in the sphere of intellectual property. So I think that currently there is no consensus on the definition of the smart contract. And the International Standardization Association, it's only working on working out the definition. However, if we try to classify the existing approaches, we can maybe outline three of them. The skeptical one, that smart contracts are actually neither smart nor contracts. It is some kind of dumb program code which is running and doing something which was been told. And second is that, well, it is something actually really new, where the contractual terms are implemented in the program code and executed subsequently automatically and without interference of parties to the contracts or third parties. And this facilitates extra trust, which is not achievable in the centralized systems. For example, when you are trying to buy iTunes song, you are actually also engaging in automated contract, because the payments, the downloading process, they are all automated, but they are controlled by the centralized party, by the Apple, and there is no guarantee that you will be able to download this song, or that you will be actually not later, you will later have access to it, or something else can happen. And blockchain as a basis for smart contract helps to mitigate those risks. So currently, I think that one of the most interesting definitions of the smart contracts are given in the recently adopted law of the Belarus, which is dedicated to the digital economy and has extensive provisions on blockchain. And according to it, smart contract is a program code functioning on the blockchain for the purposes of conclusion and performance of contracts or other legal acts So I think it is broad enough to cover various approaches to smart contracts. And I think that it is not the final stage. Actually, when we are talking about smart contracts in IBM, and we are talking with researchers in this topic, they say that in some point of time, it has the potential to become a new paradigm of contracting, when the convergence of various IT technologies, Internet of Things, big data, and deep learning will finally happen. It will be electronic agents who will conclude contracts without direct human involvement. And since electronic agents, they don't comprehend anything else than computer code, the computer code will be actually the new contracting language. And we should be actually ready for that. So, but this is a little bit futuristic. It is a perspective of maybe 10, 15 years, although some of the aspects of it can be already found in the present reality. So, what potential smart contracts have in IP from my perspective? I think that it may help to combine the simplicity of existing open source Creative Commons licenses with the opportunity to receive license fee. What do we have now? For example, a person wants to share his work with the whole world, and one of the principal points is to mitigate various transaction costs. Instead of drafting their own license agreement, engaging in negotiations, etc., they go to, for example, Creative Commons site, pick up one of the licenses they like, and use it. And others, they understand these terms. This license has network effect already, and actually that works. But the problem is that all those licenses are royalty-free. So it is good for sharing. It is not good for earning, actually, at least for gaining direct license fee from the user. And if we are building a system of IP management on a blockchain and implement all those other aspects of ecosystems such as cryptocurrency and smart contracts, we can combine both. We can have libraries of smart contracts, quite similar like we have Creative Commons types of licenses or open source. And we can use them to receive license fee by means of cryptocurrency from the users, which will be administrated by the blockchain. And this will also mean that there will be this disintermediation. Those good old collective societies, they won't be really needed because all the payments and usage will be transparent, and it can be traced through the blockchain register. It doesn't mean, although, that all the intermediaries will disappear. Blockchain creates new types of intermediaries, and in this case, all those collective societies may play the role of operators of storage for that digital content, because they already operate various databases. and they have capacities for that. We cannot store digital content on the blockchain itself. It's too heavy. So we will need someone else. And about the project. Currently in the Russia, we are trying to implement those ideas. There is an IP chain project which is managed by the consortium, consisting of Russian Patent Office, collective societies, universities, and so-called Skolkovo, which is the analog of some Silicon Valley, some kind of innovative valley of Russia. And the idea is to create a blockchain-based community based on Hyperledger Fabric, which will enable not only to register various IP rights on a blockchain, but also to manage them through their smart contracts. And the libraries are already actually started to build. And to organize the exchange, the organized exchange for IP rights. So currently we have this on the phase of prototype. And well, of course we faced many problems during that implementation. I think that some of them will be raised later during the second bullet point. But I have to admit that the possibility of using blockchain and smart contracts for managing IP property is not actually a talk. It is, as we saw, is also a matter of already existing projects which are progressing. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think a number of very interesting points have been raised with regard to the first topic. Does anyone in the audience would like to ask a question to the panelists? Yes, please. Yes, microphone.
My question is essentially about the subjectivity involved in any IP sort of transaction. So I think you touched upon this about the exceptions to use. So for example, de minimis. How little is little for the purposes of copyright? Or even for the standards of how you establish the right. So how would smart contracts deal with this subjective areas when, say, you're dealing with licensing, and I want to, again, use it for a student film where I may not need to pay.
Excuse me, could you please let to set a microphone? Thank you.
So essentially that, how would smart contracts deal with the question of subjectivity involved in IP? Because there is always that element.
I'm gonna be critical. So, at least in my view, I think that it's, I mean, the blockchain in terms of digital right management is not really the, like, it's basically just the backend, right? So it's the place in which you record the information that then a software, whatever it is outside of the blockchain, will rely upon in order to decide how to act, right? So at no point in time, I think it just doesn't make sense to actually use a smart contract to decide whether or not you can actually use a particular piece of content in a particular way. It's not up to the blockchain to decide that. The blockchain is just this registry in which you record specific information about the work, about the rights of those work. The real amazingness, in my view, of the blockchain is actually just this ability to create something that represents as like that tokenize a particular intellectual property, right? And this is beautiful because this is new. Because until now we did not have the ability of actually have rare digital content, right? So what happened is that doesn't actually lead to any form of enforcement. All that happened is that I'm actually creating a tokenized version of my intellectual property. I'm assigning rights to you. Now you can prove that you have the right. Now you can make millions of copies of the digital content, but only you can prove that you have the right to actually exploit it in a particular manner. So now, let's say that we have a software. You have a software on your computer. The software on the computer can be instructed to look at the blockchain and to see whether you do have the right to play that movie, for instance. If it decides that you have the right, it's going to play it. If not, it's not going to play it. Irrelevant, regardless of the blockchain, right? So the enforcement mechanism has nothing to do, like the blockchain has nothing to do with the enforcement. It's only the information that will provide the necessary data for external software to then decide how to act.
Software or humans?
Or humans, absolutely, yeah.
Stuff will still stay off the blockchain.
Yes.
Executive elements of IP, so to speak.
No, so the blockchain only, in my view, in my personal view, the blockchain should only be used to record the relevant information and potentially, if you really want to, for transacting, for paying, if necessary, the royalty and then dispatching it as you like. But this is just the back end. The front end is completely based on whatever decision of a software, of a human, or whatever.
Thank you. We have time for one more question on the first point. Any takers? Yes, please.
Rather than questions, maybe to shape, we also have many young researchers. One issue when I start trying to understand this wagon, wagon, I would say the blockchain wagon. One thing, permissioned and permissionless blockchain makes a great difference. Actually, there are maybe two different paradigms, and legal implications could be studied or understood differently for these two different applications of blockchain. Permissionless, which is the Bitcoin we know, and the other permissioned blockchain that I'm not going to explain here. But for those who want to do research on this, bear this in mind. There are two different types of blockchain, and they make great difference in legal applications and in usage. The second thing young researchers could think about, this brings great implications on the theory of the contract law. So now we have a kind of a real contract, which means that when you make the contract, it also executes itself. So this is a bit different than what we know in continental law. We have promise and performance. Now those two states conflate. That's an important theoretical issue. Young researchers could think about that as well. So that's two important issues that I wanted to raise. Thank you.
There was Daria here who wanted to ask.
Oh, sure, please go ahead.
My name is Daria. I'm from Moscow. I have one question. Smart contracts are kind of form contracts which limit considerably the freedom to negotiate, and smart contracts have such a feature that they are self-executable. So they leave no possibility for a party to exit, but it contradicts to contract freedom. How can we tackle this problem? Thank you.
Let me maybe start. Well, the smart contract will do what is written in the program code. So we can provide in the program code certain circumstances depending on which the contract will terminate. So it actually depends on the quality of the code, and those libraries of smart contracts which I mentioned, well, in order to be actually effective, they need to be very sophisticated and actually to implement many provisions of the traditional contract law, but in the form of automatization and program code. So this is one point. And another point is that actually, even if you have concluded a smart contract, it doesn't prevent you from concluding other smart contracts, including those which may also, how to say it, they will amend the existing ones. So technically, I think those aspects of contract law to a certain degree may be implemented in the code. However, there are certain situations, for example, when the contract was concluded as a result of fraud or threat or something else, some circumstances which originate off-chain. And in this case, we will need to have some overlay applications or overlay solutions in order to align blockchain realities with the legal realities. Blockchain itself cannot fix it, neither smart contracts.
Thank you very
If I
much.
can I add something?
Oh yes, please
Yes.
do.
I just want to say 2 sentences. One is that a smart contract is to a contract what a koala bear is to a bear, which means that they share the same name, but they actually have nothing in common. And this actually creates a lot of discussion within lawyers, just discussing whether a smart contract is a valid enforceable contract. It is literally simply a computer code with particular characteristics. Now, of course, it can give rise to implicitly to an actual legal contract, but the smart contract itself is not a contract. The second sentence is that essentially what happens is that you're shifting the burden, right? So today, by default, a contract is not enforced, and then if the other party does not comply with the obligation, then you need to go to court, or you need to identify ways to actually make this contract to be enforced. When you actually enter into a transaction through a smart contract, the default is enforcement. And then if you think that the contract has been executed and should not have been executed because of various situations, that's where you then need to intervene, either through a judicial procedure or whatever, to actually remove or not terminate or actually recover from the execution of the contract. So it's the same problem, but it's the opposite one in some way.
Thank you. I suggest to proceed to the next topic and discuss relationship between blockchain and copyright ownership databases. Guido, would you like to start?
Yep.
If possible, could you speak maybe for 5 minutes or so?
5 minutes?
Yeah.
Yep,
Thank you.
okay. I will endeavor. Lawyers love to talk, so I will try to be brief. So I will start with the origin of the world, essentially. So registration of copyright. So what was the function, like before the Berne Convention, you had the requirement to register copyright, otherwise you didn't have any copyright, right? And what was the function, or one of the main functions of this registration? It was censorship, because you had to deposit your work, and then the government would read your book, see if it's okay with the church, and then decide if you deserve copyright or not. So really the Berne Convention was a tremendous innovation in that it, in theory, eliminated this requirement for copyright registration. The US, however, found a very subtle way to actually keep that requirement. So in theory, in the US, you have copyright even without registering it. However, if you don't register it, then you cannot really enforce it. You cannot claim damages in case of infringement, and so on. So that's quite, I think, problematic. Also in terms of the privacy of the authors that would like to stay anonymous or pseudonymous. They have to disclose their identity in order to register their copyrights. In other jurisdictions like England, for instance, you don't have to register copyright, but it's true that a good lawyer will advise you to register it in order to have evidence that you created that work in that specific moment in time. And that's very useful in infringement proceedings. And then a third problem is, oh, sorry about that. Here we are. A third problem is forgery. The UK Chief Scientific Advisor said that many public registries of property and intellectual property are still paper-based, and it's very easy to have forgery when the forms are in paper. So how can blockchain provide a solution to that? It could provide a solution in that a blockchain platform could issue a token with a proof of authenticity in which you have a time-stamped copyright registration. So you know that you created a certain work in a certain moment in time. Of course, there could be the case that someone else steals your work and registers it before you. That's quite problematic. Then, when it comes to paper forgery, again, the UK Chief Scientific Advisor said that blockchain will be great because it's tamper resistant, right? Some claim that a register based on blockchain would be cheaper, transparent, and user-friendly. This is not necessarily the case. It depends on how the blockchain is designed. There is a very good paper written by Jim Bacon, Christopher Miller there, called Demystifying Blockchain. I would recommend that you read it in order to understand really how blockchain doesn't mean anything and everything at the same time, and what are the legal implications of that. From my point of view, what's interesting is that you could use, remember that registration had a function of censorship, right? And now with blockchain, you could have registration without having censorship, because blockchain has no single point of failure. This means that even if the government attacks one of the servers, the information or the work will be out there anyway, and I think that's brilliant. And it can also, to some extent, help pseudonymous authors because it creates cryptography, and the blockchain creates a sort of unique mask that's associated with the author, and in theory they don't have to disclose their identity. Then I will be very quick on the problem of ownership. So we all talk about the sharing economy and so on, but not so much about the sharing society. The fact that many of us share content created by others, and these people were sharing content that was created by others, and so on. And so it's really hard to track this and to trace back to the real author, and this has an impact in terms of fees, royalties, and so on. It's a fact that millions of royalties get lost because companies such as YouTube and Spotify don't know who are the owners of the copyright. And how is that possible? For a number of reasons. I think the main one is that music metadata are fragmented in a number of databases that are owned by different companies. These databases don't sync, and these companies have different views on which data should be publicly available and which data should be private. And then there is another problem. Like when you listen to a song, you think that maybe there is the singer, and that's you're experts, but the common citizen will think there is just one copyright owner for a song. But actually, for every song, there are at least 3 copyright owners. You have the owner of the lyrics, the owner of the music, and the owner of the sound recording. So you have this sort of very complex structure, and this has an impact in what's called the credits conundrum. So I don't know if you remember that when we were young, there were CDs. Some of you remember still that? Yeah, I love that. And one of the great things in CDs and vinyls was that you bought them, you opened them, and you started reading the names of the people who were contributing to that music. Not just the name of the singer, which is important, but it's just one part of the picture. Now, when you listen to something on Spotify, what do you know? You just know the name of the singer. And I think that's a problem in terms of, again, credits, conundrum, and attribution. And I will conclude with some potential solutions that blockchain might provide. I believe that, I'm not very good with this thing, okay. I believe that blockchain could help create a decentralized, open source, global platform owned and controlled by no single entity with accurate real-time and global data. And this is very important in order also to overcome the territoriality of copyright. And Primavera and Wright, in their paper from 2015, said that one of the problems in creating such a global registry is that governments should trust each other. But now in theory, with blockchain, we don't need trust in theory. So we could create this kind of database. One last word on, again, I said it before, on the disintermediation of killing the middleman. That's not going to happen. In all the fields, you will see that the traditional intermediaries will do their best to keep the internet centralized, and that's what's going on, for instance, also in the field of music, with the main collective societies in the world developing their own blockchain. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Balazs, would you like to be next?
Yes, please. Can you change the presentation? And may I ask? Thank you. I would like to use this opportunity to make the first public announcement. Since 1st of January at the University of Amsterdam, Institute for Information Law, we are running a blockchain and society policy research lab. And it's an ERC-funded project. For the next 5 years, we're going to be looking at, we're trying to look beyond the hype and separate what's technically possible from what makes sense for the individual in each case, and what is societally desirable ultimately, because that is what we should be looking at. I'm going to be the party pooper here. What I see here is that it's deja vu all over again, to quote Yogi Berra. We have seen this 20 years ago, we have seen 10 years ago that suddenly there is a new technology out there which we are not really capable of fully grasping its consequences, but we believe that the fundamental characteristics of the technology, which are decentralized in some configurations, which are open, which are distributed, would yield or would result in fundamentally changing societal, economic, political, cultural relations. This is the hope. This was the hope with the internet, this was the hope with the Web 2.0, and this is the hope now with blockchain, that certain technological characteristics will translate into economic, social, political design, architecture choices. And it's all about disruption, right? It's gonna be whatever it is, the status quo, and whoever are now the incumbents will change beyond recognition. And I'm unable to run now the YouTube clip where from Star Trek, where the Borg come and announce that you will be assimilated, resistance is futile. But in reality, what we've seen already with Web 2.0 and Web 1.0 is that law is not code. Law is much more than simply if-then rules laid down in a contract or in a statute. It's all about conflict resolution, it's all about negotiation, it's all about mediation, it's all about creating and structuring incentives for people to behave in certain manners or achieve certain private or public goals. And we also have learned that technological design choices are shaped by power, and they are distorted by power over time. And whatever started out as a decentralized sharing economy turned out to be Uber, right? What a disappointment, what an utter disappointment. The existing technological layers sometimes help us to overcome existing societal inequalities. Sometimes they reinforce and reproduce them. And status quo is much harder than to change than what it's imagined to be in the Silicon Valley. Also with the incumbents, Guido also noted that previously some of the incumbents are resilient and hard to make them go away, but some others are actually useful. It's hard to say that, but maybe collecting societies are actually adding value, maybe. So it's not this whole blockchain discussion is not that easy and not that straightforward. And last summer we have been running a workshop where we invited all kinds of stakeholders from the copyright industry, and the ultimate conclusion was there: do we face a problem? Do we have a problem which we were unable to solve because we didn't have blockchain? And the answer was, I'm not sure. And you know, we have been discussing copyright registries. We have been discussing some issues around licensing. You know, global repertoire database, that 15-year project where collecting societies try to harmonize their repertoire database, didn't happen because there was no blockchain. It didn't happen because each and every collecting society was disincentivized to share data with the other or with the public. You know, maybe some of the architectures, some of the particular architectural choices within blockchain might help overcome that, but it's not the blockchain that will help overcome that, but a particular design choice, which might be completely different from the open, decentralized Bitcoin-based architecture which fuels the hype or fuels the expectations. And also, some of the issues have been raised here. Are we just reproducing the DRM discussion that I was really hoping died a couple of years ago, and reanimating that zombie that suddenly we have a technology which will solve everything: distribution, enforcement, monetization, and whatnot. So instead of talking about what the technology can do, maybe we should turn our attention to the incentives different stakeholders may have or may not have to go with a blockchain-based solution. Why would end users want to use services that use blockchain? Why would end users want to record on the blockchain an information of every single play of every single MP3? Why is in my interest to actually have that, that I, 2 in the morning, Sunday, I played Lady Gaga? Why, who has the interest actually or the incentive to store this information for eternity? Why would the long tail artists want to switch? What is the benefit for them? Is there a benefit for them to use usual music or Miss Mycelia or whatever solution is there? Why would a superstar, Lady Gaga, switch from whatever is making them millions at this moment to something that may or may not, right? Why would institutional rights holders, CMOs, contribute to their own disintermediation? Why would, if I was a CMO and asked, please share your repertoire database so we can disintermediate you, I would say, like, no, right? It's like, it won't happen, right? I won't voluntarily give up my, my gatekeeper position unless you can propose me something even better than that. And I don't see those discussions taking place. Maybe there are answers to this. There are good answers, and maybe you know these answers already, but I think we should ask these questions. And we should also ask the stakeholders questions. Yeah, how can we get those players involved, like collecting societies, like publishers, like record labels, like Spotify's or Google's or YouTube's, whose participation is actually necessary to make this, make any blockchain application mainstream? Is it something that that's part of the thinking of how we get them on board? Do we need to get them on board, or do we think of this whole process as in the Linux versus Microsoft, Wikipedia versus Encyclopedia Britannica model, which worked for some, for these two, but haven't worked for these gazillion other projects which tried to replicate but failed, and we don't even remember their names. What is the value that current intermediaries provide us? Do we understand really what we are trying to disintermediate? Do we understand really when we say we don't need trusted middlemen, what we don't need actually, and what is the value that we are willing to get rid of when we try to disintermediate them? I think it's not like replacing a trusted middleman with the trust in the machine or trust in the code. It's not even replacing one type of middleman with another technological types of middleman, which is actually happening. But I think it's more like creating competitive markets of trust when it comes to identity provision, when it comes to giving accurate and adequate information on who owns what. And maybe current middlemen are actually the most trustful ones of those. So if I had to choose who knows who owns the copyrights for the picture that you used in your presentation about Picasso, I would rather turn to a pictorial rights organization than anyone else, right? So maybe we are just reproducing them on the long run. And with smart contracts, I think there is a potential there. With smart contracts, we can actually automate a large amount of dumb transactions with smart contracts. But there will always be a layer, like the same with Facebook and content moderation, or where you cannot replace wholly existing legal structures which take care of conflict resolution, moderation, and the handling of more complex cases than I spin that one, here is your money. Again, we need fallback infrastructure, so if anything goes wrong, if all the information, if quantum computing makes blockchain obsolete, we don't want to stand there naked and not having the old infrastructures which made our world running before we put all the data on blockchain. So going back to the big picture, I think even if all the assumptions behind blockchain come through, we still need to ask this question: if we allow smart contracts and blockchain to privately order the copyright domain through contractual licenses encoded in smart contracts, is it a better world than the current statutory public ordering negotiated through public institutions and through our democratic institutions? Why would a smart contract-based private set of rules be better than a democratically negotiated one? And this is where I would like to close my provocation here.
Thank you. And it's just to take one, maybe two very quick questions from the audience. What do you all think? Do you tend to agree more with Guido or with Balazs?
My name is Paul de Hurt. I'm a law professor. Before choosing sites, I heard many questions from the last speaker, but I missed the answers to the questions. So, and then I can make an informed decision. But I take, for instance, the intermediaries. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think intermediaries play, they are not there by accident, they are not there by chance. They play a super important role in actually managing truth, managing trustful information. And I think that's a value that they currently maintain. They spend 5, 10, 15, 20% of all the royalties collected to maintain truth on who owns what kind of compositions, of who owns which rights, right? So if there is a better way to do that, if there is an efficiency gain there, I'm very happy, and they will be the first to implement that because they have a very strong financial incentive to do so. But I haven't seen that happening. All I've seen that, as soon as we know the truth, and it's put on blockchain, we don't need those guys to maintain the state of truth. But who puts the truth into the system has not been discussed. And I think as long as we need someone to know the truth to be put on the blockchain system, we need them. And even after that, it's very good that we have a fallback option. If blockchain is goes down the drain because quantum computing makes current encryption unusable, then I'd rather have them than not, right? So we have to somehow create an understanding, a construction of this technology where they still have the incentive and everyone else still has the incentives to have them around. And I really don't like collecting societies, I have to add, because they are horrible in all other fronts. When it comes to transparency and all that, that's a whole other set of worms, kind of worms. But we just cannot, claim they are intransparent and they were slow to embrace the digital revolution, and now suddenly we have a technology to get rid of them. Let's do it. I think that would be stupid.
Can I add something? So it's not like I believe that all intermediaries are evil. We must distinguish from intermediary to intermediary. But the proliferation of intermediaries was certain, and it is certainly a problem for the music industry. And I think that if singers such as Taylor Swift or Jay-Z abandoned YouTube, for instance, not YouTube, Spotify, or if a singer like Imogen Heap was one of the founders of probably the main project in the blockchain project in the field, this must mean something. This means that at least partly the musicians and the artists are suffering from the proliferation of intermediaries. However, I believe that, well, I already said that we will not get rid of them. I would add that that probably one of the reasons why we'll not get rid of them is that regulators and infringement authorities need intermediaries to target them in infringement proceedings and so on. So I think that there is a need, unfortunately, from the legal system, let's say, to keep the intermediaries, and that's one of the reasons why we will not get rid of them.
I just want to add one thing, because it was part of a comment that you made that I want to modify a little bit. The criticism that we were saying in the paper was not that governments need to trust each other necessarily. It's actually about the fact that if you do want to implement intellectual property registry, you need to have, so one thing, there are two problems. One is garbage in, garbage out. So you need to have some trusted intermediary or some trusted authority at least that can verify that the content that is being recorded is actually valid. So self-declaration definitely will not work. Secondly, even assuming that you do have someone that is, or a variety, a decentralized system of certification authority that will verify that the information is correct, if you do not have a comprehensive database, then it's largely useless, in the sense that if there is not a rule, if there is not a law that says you need to record every intellectual property transaction on this registry, you might have information that might be correct, but is no longer up to date, because I will transfer my copyright, and if this transfer is not recorded on the registry, then this registry has actually no value. So what was said in the article was that you can potentially try and create a blockchain-based centralized registry for intellectual property rights, but you need to ensure, one, that what gets in is correct, and secondly, you need a governmental enforcement that everyone that will then license the copyright also register it on this database.
But wouldn't that breach the principle of tech neutrality, as such a law imposing this kind of system? The technological neutrality.
I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's like saying you need to use a blockchain. It's saying you need to use this specific database, whether it's on a blockchain or not. So you need to enforce the fact that there needs to be a logical, centralized point of reference, regardless of the technology that it's using, in which all the intellectual property transfer are also recorded. Otherwise, I will record, I'm the copyright owner, and then I transfer it, and I don't record the transfer, and then I'm still a copyright owner, right?
So if we are talking about the role of intermediaries in the new blockchain-based IP management system, in reality, I think that it will be, first of all, permissioned blockchain. So all those intermediaries, they will have the status of nodes. So they will be stakeholders in the new system. And there will be no possibility to implement current Ethereum-based or Bitcoin-based blockchain, public blockchain, for the managing of IP relationships. So if we are talking about blockchain, it is only permission-based, and only with those intermediaries already in place, playing some kind of role of nodes or oracles, whatever, in this new system.
I just wanted to make a final comment on this question of intermediaries and what are the incentives of the different actors to actually implement the blockchain system. For instance, the European Intellectual Property Office is looking into blockchain, and their strong incentive is exactly, well, to make their IP registry more efficient and more transparent. So there is a strong incentive that maybe needs to come also from, from the public institutions to actually set the standards that all the actors need to oblige to. Of course, for enforcement reasons, but also I think also to level the playing field, which is one of the problems. Of course, the blockchain technology is not going to solve, but more decentralized technologies have been promising for many, many years. And again, we don't know what are the exact formats that this is going to take, if it's permissioned or not permissioned, but there's a lot of standards and interoperability between different architectures that are permissioned or permissioned or not that need to go into, and again, maybe the public institutions can have a hand on that.
I think we are officially out of time at this moment. I think it will be rude if we ruin everyone's plans for lunch. I would suggest to continue the discussion during lunch, and I would like to conclude this panel